Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Russ Ganem, and I am Associate Provost and Dean of International Programs at the University of Iowa. Thank you for attending today's 8th annual lecture in our Commitment to Internationalization series, Where I Come From, Leading Campus Internationalization Without Walls, delivered by Professor Jewell Green Winn of Tennessee State University in Nashville. Professor Winn's lecture represents the keystone in our programming for International Education Week. It has been a true pleasure to welcome Professor Winn to Iowa City this past day and a half, and to benefit from her insights into the state of higher education and global outreach as we continue to emerge from the pandemic. In this vein, we are especially interested in hearing her perspective on what the next normal will bring. This term is refreshingly original, and if you don't mind, Jewell, I plan to steal it for future use. It is also a delight to welcome you in person. Last summer, when discussing online or face-to-face options for presenting this lecture, Professor Winn immediately chose to give her talk in person. And we are grateful for her decision, as the next normal must invariably include greater participation in face-to-face interactions. Professor Jewell Green Winn has a long list of credentials that span 35 years of experience in the field of education. She provides leadership to the Office of International Affairs at Tennessee State University as the Senior International Officer. Professor Winn also serves as Chief Diversity Officer at Tennessee State and as Assistant Professor in the Department of Educational Leadership, and I don't know when you have time to sleep. Professor Winn's degrees include a Doctorate of Education, a Master of Public Administration, and a Bachelor of Business Administration. During the early years of her career, Professor Winn experienced many firsts, which prompted her to advocate for more inclusion of women in leadership roles across disciplines. She co-founded the inaugural Women's Center on the campus of Tennessee State University, while helping to launch an annual awards dinner that recognized women excelling in their respective fields. Dr. Winn recently co-authored an anthology entitled Truth Be Told, Narratives from the Souls of Black Women, an empowering but emotional publication that allowed women of color to share their untold stories. Professor Winn's advocacy efforts did not end with women. She has a unique passion for underrepresented groups, particularly youth. Professor Winn co-founded a nonprofit that explores disciplinary disparities toward vulnerable students and realized there was a need to emphasize retroactive practices by providing academic, music, and sports enrichment as an intervention to needy students locally and abroad. This commitment to equity and inclusion led her to being selected to join and lead some of Nashville's most prominent and engaged community organizations that promote P through 20 education, diversity and inclusion, and global outreach. Professor Winn's research interests include the intersection of diversity and international affairs, global strategies for minority-serving institutions, cultural competence in theory and practice, and the acculturation of international students. She has authored and co-authored articles and book chapters relative to diversity and internationalization efforts at HBCUs. Professor Winn is a member of Diversity Abroad, the Forum on Education Abroad, the Association of International Education Administrators, where she serves as president-elect for the entire organization. Also, she serves in Women in Higher Education in Tennessee and a number of other civic and social organizations. She also serves on the board of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, the Association of International Education Administrators, the African Diaspora Nation, and the Tennessee Diversity Consortium and Alignment Nashville. And with that, we again welcome Professor Jewell Green Winn. It is an honor to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am very honored to be at the University of Iowa. As cold as it is, I am still very thankful, and I just want to thank you, Russ, and your entire team for making my stay so far very warm and welcoming. I was very impressed with a quote that I found on your website. And it said, if international programs has one purpose, It is to open the minds and hearts of our community to the reality that the world is a stronger and better place when we celebrate the humanity in every individual and in every nation. My staff, small compared to the University of Iowa, but I consider very strong and determined individuals that were willing to help us to internationalize Tennessee State University, a historical Black college in Music City, Nashville, Tennessee. We participated in a strategic planning process this past year. It took us about 5 to 6 months to do this process. Now, we didn't have any external money to do it, so I had to lean on the expertise of a lot of people. We had adopted the American Council on Education CG model, the Comprehensive Internationalization model. We looked to our own university strategic plan, and then we looked at the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Now, naturally, I wanted my department to look at Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is quality of education. That's like a no-brainer. But as I began to hear and see and read all of the craziness that was going on in our country, I started looking at the other Sustainable Development Goals and found one, number 16, that focused on peace, justice, and strong institutions. That's kind of what drove me to coming up with this topic of where I come from, leading campus internationalization without walls. So as I intently listened to all of the rhetoric and the debate regarding building the wall during the 2016 election campaign, I began to think deeper about the significance of the wall and why we as a country were so divided about it. Because where I come from, folks didn't want that wall built. Where I come from, folks had been fighting to be included, not excluded. Where I come from, folks just wanted their voices heard. So I recently read this excerpt. It's a little lengthy, but it really brought it all home for me. Walls are definite things, immovable and strong. They may provide us with safety, but just as often they are symbols of entrapment. Walls we stare at, an office wall, or even a prison wall. Borders are political boundaries. They separate countries, states, provinces, counties, cities, and towns. More than a metaphor, the wall is a symbol. It can evoke many simultaneous emotions and meanings, even contradictory ones. The Soviets built the Berlin Wall to keep citizens in, while the Chinese used the Great Wall to keep the Mongols out. To those who favor the wall, it taps deep yearnings for security in a world filled with perceived physical, emotional, social, and spiritual dangers. For others, it activates opposite emotions. It is experienced as the deepest violation of who we are as a people and of those who seek a better future in the US. It obstructs our ability to embrace immigrants who bring vitality, energy, and renewal to our multicultural society. It violates our freedom, difference of goodwill for humanity. And for those of us who oppose the wall, it is a symbol of tyranny, oppression, and monolithic vanity, evoking shame and outrage about what we are becoming. It's a shame. These conflicting meanings and emotions can be triggered simply by the mention of a 4-letter word, wall. The way this author defined that word resonated with me personally and professionally in more ways than I have to share today. As I was talking to my team, I told them we are going to lead internationalization boldly and courageously, but we would lead with grace and with gratitude. The pandemic had us all stuck. We were confused. We were afraid. We were uncertain. It was time for a shift. We had time. I was telling my colleagues here, in the 18 months that we were at home, I looked at TV more than I had looked at it in 18 years. We didn't know what we were going to do. We had to pivot. So it gave us all time to think creatively and innovatively. But we have become too comfortable behind our own walls. So allow me to share a few of the walls that we've been working to tear down individually and professionally. Since developing the Office of International Affairs at Tennessee State University in 2011, me and my team spent countless hours researching university policies and finding ways to integrate those policies with various programs, initiatives, and with a diverse range of stakeholders. We generated a new level of enthusiasm, we thought, about a concept that was relatively new to our university and other historically Black colleges and universities, but very, very familiar to predominantly white institutions since the early 1950s. We were convinced that growing our international student population would bring unique perspectives and experiences that expanded the scope of our students' understanding of a global economy. We became committed to developing the next generation of global leaders. Oh, we were so excited. And comprehensive internationalization became a pathway that prepared our students to work effectively across languages, cultures, and borders to solve shared global problems. But, and there's always a but, there was still this wall that challenged us throughout the campus from time to time. And we're all very familiar with that wall. And I'm going to call that wall resistant to change wall. For those of you who don't know and haven't Googled me or looked me up on LinkedIn, my entire academic career has been spent on the campus of a historically Black college and university, the Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. My personal goal was to become the president of an HBCU, and I was going to change the world. I would change the way people looked at and respected our beloved institutions. I was going to help underrepresented students succeed beyond their wildest imaginations, regardless of where they came from. Needless to say, Jewell, I had some personal gaps that I needed to address. I needed my bucket filled, and I didn't even know it. I had time, though, during the pandemic to think about all of these things. I had to understand my own personal biases. Understanding personal biases is so important for leaders. I cannot say that enough. I've done professional development, and I've said, how many of you all are biased? Nobody would raise their hand. I would be the only one to raise my hand. I said, guess what? The reality is we're all biased. We all have biases. It does not make you a bad person. It means you are beginning to understand yourself. We must be willing to be uncomfortable and have courageous conversations throughout the campus, not just international affairs, not just in liberal arts, not just in the College of Education, everywhere. We must learn new tools for effective communication, respect in the workplace, and creating a sense of belonging on our campuses. We must also be willing to unlearn some things that we were born with, things that we were taught, such as racism, things that were reinforced throughout our lives, and things that we may have taught others, but now realize is inappropriate, insensitive, and basically wrong. Diversity, belonging, equity, and inclusion must start with leadership. It must be more than a statement on our websites, ladies and gentlemen. It should be embedded into the core fabric of our institutions, our mission, our vision, our core values. Otherwise, it is just a noun. It's not a verb. Action is required. I call this wall the wall of social injustice. So often when I'm lecturing or presenting, people will ask me, well, what should I do on my campus? And as a researcher, what framework should I be looking for? And I typically tell them to start with the multicultural organization development model. This model refers to building organizations and organizational cultures that include people from multiple socially defined group identities. And it's an old model. It was started in 2008. but it's been revised time and time again as the researchers see the need to make various revisions. The National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Ed just launched, and I'm so proud of my colleagues yesterday, a framework for advancing anti-racism on campus. A diversity, equity, inclusion committee chaired by the institution's chief diversity officer or diversity professional to ensure that all voices are at the table as policies are reviewed, revised, and established is also a good start to dealing with that wall of social injustice. There must be a concerted effort put towards belonging. We can push inclusivity, but if individuals do not feel like they belong, then the effort is in vain. In other words, you might be invited to the party, but you won't be asked to dance. There's a big difference. Our international students come to campuses across the United States full of excitement and a determination to make their families proud. But they also come with some level of fear and anxiety, and rightfully so. As the Black Lives Matter movement pushed into full swing, our international students began to express concern and confusion. One of them said, "How can this great country that I have watched and admired for years be in such a place of hatred and anger?" I dropped my head in shame. We held very intentional conversations with our students to explain a few things. And as an African-American female, I felt compelled to share some real history that was not flawed by authors of books who were committed to making the Black American look less than. You do know that there are some books out there like that, right? There are. My personal lived experiences became paramount in these conversations. The lived experiences of my parents and grandparents were more important because some of the things they experienced, I never experienced. And I'm so happy that I didn't, because I don't know if I would have survived. I've learned over the years that racism is not born, it is taught. We certainly don't have enough time to dig into a history lesson, but I would be remiss if I didn't reflect on a few moments in history that have been stark reminders of the why. Black Wall Street and the Rosewood Massacre are just two of the many incidents post-slavery that resonate with me as I attempt to find some kind of sense in what we've witnessed over the last few years and to address the question, how did we get here? Like, where did I really come from? Black Wall Street, as it was affectionately called, located in Greenwood, Oklahoma, was modern, majestic, sophisticated, and unapologetically Black, as one writer stated. Unfortunately, and quite tragically, it was also the site of one of the bloodiest and most horrendous race riots and acts of terrorism, I might add, that the United States had ever experienced from May 31st to June 1st, 1921. 300 African Americans lost their lives and more than 9,000 were left homeless when the small town was attacked, looted, and literally burned to the ground. The Rosewood Massacre was an attack on the predominantly African American town of Rosewood, Florida in 1923 by large groups of white aggressors. The town was entirely destroyed by the end of the violence, and the residents were driven out permanently. And I'm sure all of us can remember some of those moments in history that just made us feel like, is this really happening? Let's fast forward to 2009, and certainly not to dismiss the numerous lives lost during the entire civil rights movement and beyond, but bear with me. I'm going to give you some reminders. Oscar Grant, he was pulled by police from a Bay Area transit in one of the first police shootings captured on video by bystanders. Trayvon Martin, unarmed teen, killed by a white man and acquitted of all charges. Tamir Rice, a mere child, age 12, killed by a white police officer, acquitted of all charges. Freddie Gray died after suffering major spinal injuries while in police custody. Eric Garner, killed by white New York police officer. Michael Brown, Terrence Crutcher, Botham Jean, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and I could go on and on. And we want to know why Black people are so angry. why we're so tired. As my colleague said earlier, drained, whatever adjective you can come up to describe. So imagine when our international students get to the United States and they see this, what do you think they feel? Like, is this going to happen to me? We have some things, ladies and gentlemen, that we have to deal with. Martin Luther King and many others during his era protested peacefully, right? He was all about peace. Colin Kaepernick, the famous quarterback, took a knee as a means to protest peacefully, but we continue to not be heard in so many instances and blatantly disrespected. So what happened? The younger generation, they go to the streets. They start throwing things and tearing up things and burning down buildings and just acting all kinds of ways. They're acting out what they can't articulate because nobody's hearing them when they are trying to articulate it. That's a problem. Black people have been treated unfairly, unjustly, unequally, and unnecessary since we were forced to come to this America, to build and serve, definitely not the land of the free. We've come a long way. Yes, we have. In many cases. But when my generation, late baby boomers, I know you wouldn't believe that, but yes, I am a late baby boomer. We think progress has been made, but then the societal ills just make us sick again. We can't understand so many failed policies, disparities in housing, social services, and yes, education. Education should have been the pathway to prosperity for Black people, but we weren't even allowed access to that, equal access that is, until the 1950s with Brown versus Board of Education. I could go on and on, but most of you know the story. This, ladies and gentlemen, is where I come from. It's very difficult to solve a problem that you don't understand. Thus, hope, healing, and a healthy debate, because we're in higher ed, so we know how to have healthy debates, has made it to the top of my bucket list. What must we do? All of us have some next steps. I say commit to doing something. Stop being comfortable with being silent, wherever you come from. Silence is not an option. I can proudly and confidently say, I am a senior international officer. I am the chief diversity officer. I am assistant professor in the College of Education. But at the end of the day, what does all of that mean? Titles, labels. What does that mean if I am not inspiring others to believe in change? If it means that I am not helping to enable them that there is a reality that we have not come to grips with yet, that doesn't mean anything. You may as well call me dog catcher. You can call me a pilot. You can put any label, any title on me. But if I have not dealt with internally the things that I need to deal with, it's just a title. It's been very, very difficult for people of color, people from where I come from, people from where others come from, our international students that come telling us their horror stories from their countries. It's very, very difficult. But leadership can never be about me and you, but it starts with me and you. You can never, ever improve a team, an organization, or an institution unless you first improve yourself, right? Dealing with us from the inside out. You can try as hard as you can. You can bring in the best people, recruit them from Nebraska, recruit them from Ohio, recruit them from everywhere. But if they're not right on the inside, you're going to continue to have those types of problems. I had to tear this wall down over and over again. Every time I changed positions, I had to tear this wall down. That wall was called the wall of skepticism. I wasn't sure. I was skeptical. I was still afraid. I was still trying to figure out a lot of things about myself, but I was still leading. And I was leading boldly. I was leading courageously. I thought I was leading with grace. I thought I was leading with gratitude, but there were still problems. And I couldn't do it all by myself. I told my team, we're going to do something different. We have bi-monthly international coffee and conversations with our students. So last year I said, we're going to engage them in a very difficult conversation a conversation about racism in America. So I heard some rumblings from people saying, okay, here she goes. I'm like, yeah, here I go. Either you're going to come with me or you're going to stay there and be trapped by your wall. Because I'm ready to do something about these walls. It wasn't going to be a conversation that was going to be twisted and skewed by the media. It was going to be a conversation with passionate and impacted individuals who have their best interest at heart. I was getting feedback from my team that the students were still scared. They were still confused. They didn't know what to do. So as the leader, I had to use my voice. I had to use my voice as a platform to influence and ignite the kind of dialogue that would lead to a better understanding and hopefully a meaningful change for us all. It's not easy to change over 400 years of injustice. But as King stated, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I challenge everyone watching me talk today, if you haven't changed over and started doing something else, to make a difference. Speak up, stand up, hire a qualified individual who doesn't look like you. Find that person, develop that person, promote that person, sponsor that person, and then ask questions. We must own our own ignorance, ladies and gentlemen. I know it sounds like a hard word, but my father always told me ignorance is temporary, stupidity is forever. Own it. We've got to be able to talk about it. We've got to own our hurt. If we've been hurt, as we talked about earlier, tell your story. That hurt me, Sam. It hurt me. When you invited all of the white people to the room and you know I'm on the leadership team and I didn't come, why didn't you invite me? Talk about it with grace and with gratitude. Thankful that you even have a job. Grace that you have to extend to others when you want it in return. I have to breathe after that. We are going to continue to provide platforms to educate and inform our international students of what's really going on. Systemic racism, as much as people don't want to hear it, and yes, 21st century segregation is real. We're going to implement heritage programming on our campuses so that Black and Brown students can become motivated to study abroad in countries where they have roots. It's not too late. We are going to tear down the wall of ignorance. Our students don't know. Some of our students have never even been out of their community. They've never even been on a plane. And we're talking about taking them 4,000 miles across the country. We've got to be able to talk to them. But we've got to talk to them with an honest lens. These kids these days know when we're jiving them. They know that. They also know when you don't know. When you're having a conversation with them, they're looking at you kind of twisted. Oh yeah, they know you don't know. But if we build a relationship with these babies and we do our homework and deal with ourselves, it'll be a much easier process. Now, I would love for us to all live together as brothers and sisters in a community and sing Kumbaya and all of that, and live with, not so much friction and not so much bitterness. But this is an unfinished work that each and every generation of Americans must be dedicated to. I've seen a lot in my 40 years in higher education. As Russ was saying earlier, I was the first female to serve in a leadership position back in 1988. Then I fast forwarded 10 years and I was denied a senior leadership position because guess what? I was a female. That broke my heart. How did I know that? Because my mentor, who was the president at that time, called me in to tell me that. And he asked me, what do you want me to do? I was crying so hard I couldn't even get my words out to tell him some things that I really had on my mind, but I had to remember he was the president. So I had to leave that alone. I was confused. I was hurt, and I felt that it was basically unfair. So what did I do? I used my voice. I was determined to take a stand for women who lack the confidence to use their voice. I championed diversity everywhere I went. My dissertation was on diversity. I developed and taught diversity courses. I co-founded a diversity organization in my hometown, a women's center on campus. As I said in my Q&A, my middle name became diversity. Marginalized groups and oppressed individuals became my passion. I knew that I had to be the difference that made a difference. This work that we're in, it's not only hard work, it's heart work. When I see the pain and the heartache of people who don't deserve to be mistreated due to the color of their skin, their gender preference, their religious belief, their disability, their ethnic background, etc., I take it personally. You want to fight me? Treat one of our students bad. Treat one of our students with disrespect. You will get, not a physical fight, you will get a fight out of me because some of those babies don't know how to use their voice. It drives me to do something, and I usually figure it out. I call that wall the wall of fear and hatred. In conclusion, COVID-19 has taught us to accept, as Russ said, the next normal and not just the new normal. We've been in a constant state of uncertainty for almost 2 years. So from totally shut down campuses to cancel conferences, international offices have struggled, which naturally caused our international students to rethink their study destination. So campuses went into shock. What are we going to do? How are we going to increase our international student enrollment? I felt that this was an opportunity for us to change some things, to begin to make a serious impact. So when our students do return, they can actually feel like they belong. The good news is that during that time, the pivots have been amazing, especially for us. I was very surprised to learn that we supported over 150 students in a virtual study abroad, which is going to be our next normal. We continue to see hybrid global learning formats. International students are going to be provided with unique opportunities that I was sharing with Russ with the out-of-state tuition waivers when enrolling in classes. Faculty are being encouraged to participate in more research with colleagues across the globe that you may not necessarily see, but you can hear. Travel is not always a necessity anymore. It is also not a priority anymore. As you can see, we're connecting with how many ever people virtually. That's our next normal. Technology has been higher education's lifeline the last 2 years. Online learning has reached a new level with Zoom, Teams, Panopto, etc., which allows professors to be innovative and diversify teaching strategies. Technology is also assisting with internationalizing the curriculum as virtual tours and story circles are becoming more popular in our classrooms. Yes, some of these walls appear strong and immovable, resistant to change, social injustice, skepticism, ignorance, fear, and hatred. But dedicated servant leaders either possess or gain the ability to tear that wall down, climb over that wall, or knock a hole in that wall to pass through. Where I come from, that's all we know. Resilience. So what are you all going to do when you face that wall? How are you going to address your international students when they ask those hard questions? They need us, and not just the students, but every individual in every nation. Thank you so much. I would love to entertain some questions.
Well, many thanks, Jewell, for that wonderful talk. It was a very, very sort of eye-opening experience, and thank you for sharing the experience or your own sort of journey, as it were. We learned a lot about not just your career, but sort of your own personal evolution. And those are often difficult things to talk about.
It is.
So we appreciate you sharing that with us. I had a couple of questions, I think, and they're both related. The first is more general, and the second one is more specific. The general question is, I'm interested in all the walls that you talk about. The wall of skepticism, I think, was the one that resonated the most with me, because skepticism can exist even within our own community, people that we consider to be allies. And sometimes skepticism can really devolve into cynicism. I've seen that on numerous occasions. So how do you prevent skepticism from, what's the word I'm looking for, from declining or getting out of control to the point where it becomes cynicism? Because then we're already dealing with a lot of negativity to begin with. But when we all become cynical, then the negativity becomes almost, I think, insurmountable.
Yes.
So how have you dealt with that? How have you stemmed that tide? Because skepticism, we think we can deal with, but cynicism, I think, can really set us back.
Right, and that's such a good point, because that's what it leads to when it gets to that point of being very cynical. And I've experienced that a lot. There were people who told me that you're on the campus of an HBCU. There are 4 generations of my family that have been to TSU. I was the rebel. I went to a PWI, but I came back home. And some of my father's uncles were like, what are you trying to do out there at TSU, bringing all these international students in, changing all of this stuff? You know, we gotta educate these Black kids. I said, you're absolutely right, Uncle. I agree with you 100%. But we also want to prepare our Black students that we're educating to be productive in a global society. So work with me, Uncle. Let me tell you all of what we're doing. And so for me, any of those walls that we're tearing down, we need to be equipped with knowledge. You know how people say all the time, knowledge is power. I disagree. I say the use of knowledge is power. You can be as knowledgeable as, the most smartest man in the world, but if you don't use that knowledge and use it in a positive manner, it's just knowledge. He's just a smart man, and he never says a word. That's why I kept going back to, you've got to do something. You can't just hold on to the things that the conversation we had earlier. If you're doing research and you see an opportunity to work with an HBCU or an MSI, but you're skeptical to the point that you do nothing, you just think that an HBCU or MSI is going to land on the front porch of the University of Iowa, it's not going to happen. Vice versa. If it's an HBCU or an MSI, if you're skeptical about working with someone that looks differently than you, we're never going to get anywhere as a country. We have to stop being in that mindset of, I don't trust this and I don't trust this, or what if that's, we can do that all day long. We have to take action. And that's what the work of DBEI and the intersection with internationalization does. It causes you to do something.
Right. And I think, part of this is, sort of to translate all of these, I think very, very useful concepts and actionable concepts to a wider audience. I think it's important to look at this in terms of maybe almost like a cost-benefit analysis. That is to say, okay, what is your current mode of thinking costing you?
Right.
And what benefits is it depriving you of?
Right.
You could even frame it more simply than that. Now, I'm a scholar of 17th century French literature. And some of you may have heard about Pascal's wager. So Pascal he was a mathematician, but he was also a Christian thinker. And he was trying to explain his belief in God to a non-believing audience. And he said, well, what do you have to lose? If you believe in God, then you can have eternal salvation. If God doesn't exist, well, then you really haven't lost anything. No. And I sort of see that with, the things that you're talking about. So what do we have to lose by collaborating with each other, by figuring out better and smarter ways to work together, by figuring out more innovative ways to create a more just and prosperous society? Don't we all share that interest? And what do we have a lot to gain. And it seems to me not very much to lose. And in fact, the things that we would lose are the conflict, the friction, the distrust, the skepticism, you know. And so why not gamble on ourselves to make a better future, you know, and not just nationally, but internationally.
Right.
Now that sounds really pie in the sky. You could say it's all starry-eyed. I get that. But I also think that without those principles and those concepts, we don't have a frame in which to structure our actions.
Right, and that's why I think that Sustainable Development Goal number 16 is so powerful with the peace, justice, and strong institutions. I am just an avid believer that we are stronger together. I do believe we're stronger together, but we have to have some level of peace. And right now, our country is so divided. And if the United Nations looked at it like that, with the world, imagine what we have to deal with it internally here in the United States with the craziness that we're seeing. I don't even want to turn on the news anymore because I'm afraid that another person is going to be killed. Particularly my community, I have 2 Black male sons. And when all of this was going on with all the shootings, every time they would leave me or leave our home, I would have to go into prayer because I am a believer in a higher being. So I have to go into prayer and ask for their protection and covering. Who wants to live like that? Whereas, let's just say somebody else in the audience, if you have a child and you're not Black, do you think about that? Do you think about whether your son is going to have a target on his back every time he walks to the store? Someone gave me an example of this case study that we did, and a young girl had her hoodie on, and it said, Zimmerman, shoot at your own, whatever. Well, the conflict was the Black students in her class were like, get her out of class. Who does she think she is coming in class with a hoodie that says Zimmerman, shoot at your own, whatever. They didn't know that her name was Zimmerman, unfortunately, and she belonged to a rifle club. So she was promoting her being a part of the rifle club. But the perception was, she's in here promoting George Zimmerman. If she doesn't get out, we are going to hurt this child, right? So one of the individuals that were in the case study, they said, well, they should not have been so hard on her because, you know, she has a right to wear that hoodie. I said, okay, let's back up. Every time a Black man has on a hoodie and it doesn't say anything, they have a target on their back. Trayvon Martin was going to get some Skittles. Walking alone, he didn't have any insignia on his hoodie, but he was killed. Even when Zimmerman was told not to pursue him, he still pursued him. That was a place of privilege. I am a white man and I am the Homeowners Association watchman or whatever, and I am going to hurt this person. We have some stuff that we have got to deal with. So when we talk about skepticism and we talk about being cynical, it's both ways. It can be on, and I hate to always use black and white, but that's the time that we're living in. It could be the same way with Blacks. It could be the same way with whites. But for us as Black people, 400 years. 400 years. No other race was forced to come to the United States but Black people. So do you know why we're skeptical? Do you know why we're angry? And then when we come to an institution of higher learning or we walk into a corporate boardroom and we're already judged before we set foot in that place because of the color of our skin, we're tired. We're tired. So for me, as a diversity professional, I'm trying to find a way to get people to just talk, right? So if I need to get it out, let me get it out. I need to talk about it. So maybe it'll help you understand just a little bit why, they talked about Michelle Obama. They said, oh, she's just an angry Black woman. Yes. If you want to say that, oh, Jewell Winn, Dr. Winn, she's an angry Black woman. Yes, I am. I have a right to be angry, but I also know how to do things proper and in order. I also know how to extend grace and gratitude. It makes a difference. So as we're dealing with those walls, my whole goal, Russ, is just to seek first to understand and then be understood, but have a conversation. Because right now we're not talking to each other, we're fighting each other. Every day, on every front, we are fighting each other. And we can't get anywhere, like you said. We just cannot get anywhere.
Well, it's certainly not been productive, and I think that has to be the goal, is to advance as a society, as a people. And the simple fact of the matter is, no one's going anywhere. It's, and I hate to keep talking about French literature, but that's my, that's my background. So you've probably read Sartre's play No Exit, where there are three people basically condemned to hell forever. And the final line of the play is, hell is other people, and then in a sort of an existential, a moment of existential enlightenment, they say, well, let's continue. So it's like, we've got no choice.
Yeah.
We're all in this together, for better or worse. So we might as well try to make it better.
We got to do something.
Yeah, because we're not going anywhere. This isn't going to change unless we make it change, and unless we accept one another and try to figure out how we're going to make things better for all of us.
All of us. Make things better for all of us.
Because if the situation improves for one sector, it's going to improve for everybody.
It should.
It should. And we should design the society so that we have these outcomes.
Right. And lastly, real quickly, as we're preparing our students to go study abroad, it's very, very important that our study abroad advisors prepare our students mentally for what they may face when they go. Because all of these other countries that they're going to, guess what they're doing? They're looking at the news, and they are painting the African American and the Black student in a way that is not comfortable for them when they get over there, and they have microaggressions toward them and all of that. So our study abroad offices must start preparing our Black students, because as a Black mother years ago, I probably wouldn't have wanted my children to go study abroad. Even though my parents took me around the world, I may not have wanted my kids to go, because I wouldn't want them to face the things that I'm seeing on the news right now. So again, we have a lot of work to do. We're starting conversations like this. We have to start somewhere.
Right.
I think talking is the start, and then pushing the action next. So I appreciate you all just thinking and allowing me to kind of take you outside of what you're comfortable with, and listening to what I have to say from my perspective as an African-American leader on my campus.
Well, very good. Thank you again. Oh.
I do have a
So,
question.
please, sorry.
Yeah. So when you mentioned that discrimination or biases we're not born with them, we learn. So I feel like trying to correct us as adults is more of a challenge, but the pathway with children, like to prevent those seeds from being planted, seems so critical in a big change kind of way.
It is.
Because in 20 years, we could be looking at a whole different world.
We are.
Right?
We are.
I mean, so I think that's probably stood out the most.
Yeah.
And it does resonate. I know we did, Cynthia, she had to be, Asian Voices when the pandemic and COVID-19 and so much hostility. And so I participated in a bystander training just to understand. And what the main message there is, not to be bystanders, it's great, but to stand up against it. Like, we need upstanders, right? So some of these messages are just so very powerful that I think even the kids could learn to say no, like the bully playground thing. I don't know, but you've inspired me to think further on these things. And I because it's crazy to think this has been going on this long.
It is.
It's nuts.
It's
just, it's in our society, and it has to be eradicated. And I don't mean to be, not in a violent way, but just gone.
Yeah. And that's why I said hope, healing, because there's a lot of healing that needs to take place.
Yes.
And some people are not ready to heal. They still want to fight. And my thing is, we're not going to get anywhere if we keep fighting. We can have a healthy debate, But then we want action after that. We're not going to keep talking about it, but if we've never talked about it, then we don't have the steps to move forward. So
Right.
it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to unpack. And I tell my colleagues at other institutions, don't think that a person that's talking about DBEI can come in and give you a road map
Right.
to inclusion, belonging, and equity. It is a culture that must change. We have to start, and it has to go all the way through the campus. It can't just be in international programs. It can't just be, it has to be in the core institutional fabric. And that starts with who?
Well, I know it starts with our leaders, but at the same time, I don't want to give all the responsibility. And I think the support is necessary, but I liked your idea of bringing in the students and having difficult conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
Like that. We just recently did our surveys for the strategic planning process and all these listening sessions, and what bubbled up from that. And it's like unfortunate if that only happens every 5 years, right?
Right.
You know? So,
It's continuous, right?
Right,
It's
yeah.
continuous. And the presidents listen to the students. They listen to the students, but the president is the one that drives the move, helps us to move the needles. So I'm happy to hear that your president is very supportive of international programs and all of that. It makes a world of difference. It really does.
I think our president is supportive of the social regions. I think they.
Oh, I think they are. I think that, they understand that we live in a global economy, and that we're always going to be dealing with multiple populations and multiple perspectives. And that if we want Iowans to succeed, that's part of the educational process.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, that's kind of our focus, and at least in my area with the outreach and trying to get to communities. There's some communities I know there's zero diversity. So the technology can bring us into classrooms and introduce international students or students who studied abroad and share their experiences in a positive way. But
Well, there may be some diversity. It just may not be racial diversity.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
There's always
Right.
diversity, but not necessarily racial diversity. And our country needs racial healing right now.
Yes.
That's what we need right now is racial healing.
And, universities, institutions of higher learning should definitely be part of that.
Yes. Yes.
We need to bring people together.
Mhm.
We need to be, changes. We need to bring about changes for the good. And we've got to take, I think, a very synthetic and holistic approach to bringing people together and to finding solutions. Because if we don't do it, I'm not sure who is going
That's right.
to.
When higher ed speaks, everybody listens. Yes.
And we need decency
Right.
nationally or internationally.
Yeah.
See all this like insinuations and this Brandon, let's go or things like that.
Yeah.
Those even like a representative of a congressperson can wear that kind of shirts or
Wasn't that horrible? Did you?
that's so much loss of decency. I have a former president that using all these languages and that kind of decency.
Yeah.
So start macroly. Everyone should be involved and should talk. Even the presence itself is says something, and then to start a dialogue, to start to talk, have a conversation on every issue, decency included.
Well, I think we all have some more to think about. I know I will be thinking about some things that I've heard today from your area and take that. I'm going to start working on another book book chapter rather. And I've gotten some things in mind from just being here on your campus. And I just appreciate it. I'm very, very proud to be here. I am.
Well, we are proud to receive you and welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.